What's up everyone, welcome back to another episode of AWS tutorial. And today I'll show you how to build a complete register and login system with React.js in the front end and a serverless API with the dynamodb on the back end. And then we're going to host everything on AWS. So at the end of the video, you're going to be able to build a website that looks like this, where you have the home page that you can access with or without authentication. And then you have a register page where you can sign up for an account, and then you can log in with the credentials. And then finally, you have a premium content page that you can only access after you log in. And if I'm not logged in and try to access that page, it just redirect me to the login page. And even if I type in the URL, it's not going to let me get there. And right now, let me register for a new account and log into the system. I just call it Felix. And then email, let's say it's test@email.com. And then username, Felix, password, just do ABC. Alright, it's telling me that registration is successful. And now let me log in with the credential. Nope. Username, Felix. And if I type in the wrong password, it's going to tell me password is incorrect. And if I type in the wrong username, let's say that, and it's going to tell me user does not exist. So let me fix that. And hit login, and now I'm logged into the system, and this is the premium content page that is able to get my name and telling me that I'm logged in right now. And if I log out, it just directs me back to the login page. So this is going to be a two-part series, and this video is going to be part one of it, where I'm going to build out the backend system with the serverless API and the Dynamo database. I have a separate video that talks about what serverless is and its advantages over non-serverless APIs. I'll include a link down below so you can check it out if you're interested. But in this tutorial, I'm going to focus on the implementation of it and the logic on how to handle the authentication. So without further ado, let's get to it. Alright, so right now I'm on the homepage of the AWS console. And step one is to create a DynamoDB table to host our user data. So I'm going to type in DynamoDB. Open that into a new tab. Create table. Give it a name. I'll just call it Jademeister users. And then for the partition key, I'm just going to use username, but you can use other things if you want. I'm going to use a string as the type, and then use other default settings. Create table. Alright, so it's done. And now we're ready to create a serverless API. But before we do that, we need to create IAM role for the Lambda function to use. So I'm going to type in IAM. Open that into a new tab. I'll click rows. And then create role. We're going to choose Lambda because the Lambda function is going to use it. And now we need to attach two policies to it. One is for the CloudWatch because we need that to see our logs on CloudWatch. And then the second one is DynamoDB because we need to access our data in the Dynamo table. So I'm going to type in CloudWatch log, full access, and then DynamoDB. I'll give it full access as well for this demo. Then hit next, next, give it a name. I'll just call it login backend role. Create. Alright, so that is done. And now let's create a Lambda function for the API. So just type in Lambda, open that into a new tab, create function from scratch. I just call it login backend. We're going to use node.js. For permission, we're going to use the role that we just created. I believe it's that one. And then create a function. Alright, so it's done. One thing I'm going to do before I move on is that I'm going to increase the timeout and reserve memory just in case. In general, this is enough, but I'm not exactly sure how long it's going to take, so I'm going to increase it to maybe 5 seconds just in case. And then memory, I just do 500. That should be more than enough. So hit save. And now let's create an API gateway that acts as the front door. Open that into a new tab. And then make sure that you choose the REST API because that's what we're going to use. So REST API, build, hit OK. I'll do new API. give it a name. I do login backend gateway. I'll leave it as original, and then create API. And now let's create some resources. So the first one we're going to do is the health. So create resources. This is for the health check. Alright, so this is very important. Make sure you check this, because if you don't, when the front end client calls it, it's going to error. So create resources. And then create a method, which is a get method. Hit check. We're going to choose Lambda function. And make sure you check this as well, because that's going to give us all the request attributes by default. And then select the Lambda function that we just created. I think we call it login backend. And then hit save. Then hit yes. Alright, let's create a few more. The next one is the register endpoint that we're going to use to register new accounts. Check this. Create resources. Create method. This is going to be a post. Then check this. And then choose the Lambda function. Hit save. Hit OK. And then the next one is the login endpoint that handles all the logins. Create. And then we're going to create a method that is also a post. Check this, and then choose the Lambda function. Hit OK. And then lastly, we're gonna create another endpoint for verified, because we need to check if the access token is still valid and not expired. So we're gonna call it verified. Course. Great. We're gonna create another method that is also a post. Hit check. It's saved. Hit OK. Okay, so we have to find all the endpoints. Right now, let's go back to root and deploy the API. Deployed. New stage. I just do a prod. Deploy. Alright, so that is done. And now let's go back to the Lambda function and create some dummy return object for each of the methods. So come here. Delete everything. What we're going to do is we're going to define some path parameters. So the first one is the health path. That is just health. And then the next one is register path. That is just register. The next is login path. And then lastly is the verified path. And inside the handler, first thing first, we're going to cancel the log to log out what the event is. And then we're going to define a response variable to return to the client. And here we're going to have a switch statement. That we're going to check if the method is get and if the path is the health path. We're going to set response to be 200 with an empty body. We're going to define this method later. And then break. And then do the same thing for other endpoints, just for testing purposes, just to return it 200 for now. Post. Register path. Post. Login path. Post. Verify path. And then we have a default response that's gonna say "404 not found." And then finally we're gonna return the response to the client. And now let's define this method. Into function that takes in a status code and then a body object, and it's going to return an attribute is status code, and then the headers. The first one is access control allowed origin to be everything. This is very important because this allows our clients to call this API because it has a different endpoint to enable cores. And then content type to be application JSON, and then the body is just gonna be a stringified version of the body object because that is what API gateway is expecting, a string. Alright, hit deploy. And now let's test our dummy API. Go back to API gateway and copy this URL. And now let's go to Postman. Paste that URL here. And then the first one is the get method for the health check. Let's hit go. Alright, it's 200. And then post register 200, so that's working as well. And then log in 200, and then finally verify. Alright, so it all seems to be working now, but the problem we have now is the API right now is open to the world. Anyone can access that, and we don't want that to happen. So we're going to configure API gateway to require an API key in the headers in order to do the request. So let's get back to the AWS console. So API gateway, scroll down. So API keys, action, create API key. I just call it GenMeister client, auto generate, saved. Alright, so that is the API key that's auto generated. And then now let's go back to the API. Scroll down, usage plans, create. I'll just call it test plan, rate just to 1000, then 500, 1 million, why not? And then next, add API stage. We're going to choose the API backend gateway that we just created. Stage, prod, we only have one stage. Hit a check mark, hit next. And then now we're going to add the API key we just created. Is that one? I have a misspelling over there, but whatever. Check yes, and then hit done. Alright, now let's go back to API. Go back to the API gateway, and then for each method we are going to enable API key required. True, hit yes, and then same thing for this. Edit, true, check mark, true, check mark. Last one. And now make sure that you deploy the API again, otherwise it's not going to work. So action, deploy API, choose the prod stage. Alright, so I think this is going to take about 30 seconds to process. So I'm going to pause the video and then come back in a couple of minutes. Okay, so it's been a minute. So right now if I go back to Postman, it was 200 before. And now if I hit send again, it's going to say 403 forbidden. And the same thing is going to happen to other methods. 403 forbidden. Alright, so it seems like it's working. And now let's use the API key to get access. So scroll down, API keys. That is the key. Show, just copy that. Go back to Postman headers. X API key, and then post it here. Then hit send again. Right, 200. Log in. Alright, it's working as well. Alright, so it seems like the setup is working. And now let's move on to the final step, which is to write the code for the Lambda function to handle the logics for register, login, and verify. I can write the code in the AWS console, but I don't like it a lot, so I'm gonna do that on VS Code and then upload the package. So I'm gonna open VS Code and have an empty folder open. First thing first, we're gonna create a package.json file because we're gonna use node.js for the Lambda. Package.json, and then define our project name. I'll just call it register login system backend. Author Felix, and then version just do 1.0.1, and then dependencies. We are going to use two libraries. One is bcrypt.js that we're going to use to encrypt our password, and I believe that is the latest version. And then the other one is JSON web token that we're going to use to create our session token for our users when they log in. And next, let's create a index.js file, and then go back to the Lambda function and copy the skeleton code here. Okay. And then we're going to create a folder. We're going to put all the services in, for example, login, register, and verified. So let's create them now. One is the login, that obviously handles the login logic, and then register, that handles the register logic, and then finally verify. And now let's go back to the index. We're going to import all the services. So the first one is register service register. And now let's do the register logic first. We're going to first extract the request body from the event body, and then we're going to use the register service to register our new user. We're going to define that method later, register body. And since that is going to be dealing with dynamo operations, so we're going to define that as a async function. So this has to be await. So now let's define this function in the register file. First thing first, we're going to define AWS SDK, and then we're going to update the region to be US East 1 because that's where our table is, US East 1. And then we're going to define our dynamodb client, dynamodb, and then we're going to define our dynamo table called user table, and I believe we call it minus the users. And then we have an async function called register that's going to take in user info as an input, and then const the user input is going to have a name, email, username, and password. So we're going to extract all that. Name, username, and then password. And then we're going to check if any of them it's empty or undefined. We're going to return it for 1 because all the fields are required. Return. Alright, so I'm going to do one thing. I'm going to create another folder called utils, and then inside the folder I'm going to create something called util.js so that I can move this function inside the util file so that I can use that in other files as well. So util, and then I'm going to do module exports .build. Yep. And inside index.js I'm going to use that. Okay, so this is going to be util, 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 and util. Okay, now let's get back to the register one. We're gonna require util. 2 levels up, util, util. And then we're gonna do util.build response. I'm just gonna use for 1, but you can pick your number, and then a message that says all fields are required. And then if the user defines everything, we're gonna check if the username is already registered in the past by someone else. I'm gonna do const dynamo user equal to await get user. We're gonna define this method later. It takes in a username, and if something returns and it has a username, we're gonna say I'll just do for 1 for simplicity, with the message that says username already exists in our database. Please choose a different username. Alright, and then next, if the user selects a unique username, first thing we're going to do is we're going to encrypt the password, because you never want to save the password in plain text in the database. And we're going to use the library called bcrypt.js. So I'm going to do const bcrypt.js. I'll do const encrypted password is equal to bcrypt hash sync. We're going to encrypt the password, but before we do that, we're going to trim it first, just in case we have some white space. And then 10 rounds, and then we can define our user to save to our database for later use. Name is going to be equal to name, email is equal to email, of course, and then username. What I'm going to do is I'll just save that as all lowercases, just for simplicity sake. And then trim that as well. And we're going to do that when we check if the user exists. And the reason I do this is that I think if a username is Felix or Felix, I consider them the same. They shouldn't be different. but you can do it your own way if you want. And then password, we're gonna use the encrypted password. And now let's save the object to the database. We're gonna do const save user response save user, and we're gonna define the function later. And if we get back, or if we don't get back a response, we're gonna return 503 because there's an error with the message that says server error. Please try again later. And then if everything's successful, we are going to return a 200. Let's return a username back to the user. And now let's define these two methods, get user and save user. They're both dynamo operations, and they're both async functions. So async function get user that takes in a username. We're gonna define a params table name, which is the user table, and then key. Remember, when we define our table, we use username as our primary key. So that is our key. And then let's return await dynamodb .get, just get a single item, params .then response. We are going to return the response item. And then if we have an error, I'll just console.log it out. There is an error. Okay, so that is the get user, and now let's define the save user function. Save user that takes in user. And same thing, we're going to define param table name user table, and then item, we're going to save this user, and then we're going to return await put dot promise dot then return true. And then if there's an error, saving user getting user. Okay. Alright, so that is done, and finally we're going to export the function so that other modules can use it. We're only going to expose the register function. Okay, so this is done. Now let's go back to the index.js. So that is done, and now we're going to do the login logic. And same thing, first we're going to extract the request body, login body, and then we're going to use the login service to do the login logic. And now let's define this function inside login. The same thing, we're going to define the AWS stuff. So let's take this, take all that, and then we're going to define an async function called login that takes in user as the request body. And then we're going to extract username, user.username, and then password that is also coming from our user input. And first thing we're going to check is if user is not defined or username is not defined or password is not defined, we are going to return 401 and it says username and password are required, and then we can do the normal logic. We're gonna first try to get a user. Dynamo user equal to await get user that takes in the username, and if there's nothing comes back, if no dynamo user or dynamo user does not have a username, we're going to return a 403 response with a message that says user does not exist. If the user exists, we're going to check the password and see if it matches with the one that is in the database. So we're going to use bcrypt for that. Compare sync password with the password that's returned from the Dynamo item. If they don't match, we're going to return a 403 as well with a message that says password is incorrect. And if everything matches, we're going to define a user info object and return that to the user along with the access token. So we're going to do user info username and then the name as well for the user. One thing to note here is, remember what we had before was we do a lowercase on the usernames, but we leave the name of the customer or the client the same as what was input in the register. So that's going to be shown to the customer. And then we're going to create a token for the user. And actually, I'm going to do that in a different file. So I'm going to go back here. Let's do it in util auth.js. And we're going to use the JSON Web Token library for that to create a token. Oops, JWT, and then function generate token that takes in user info. If it's not defined, return null. Customer user info, username. We're going to use the email for the hashing, but you can use other attributes if you want. And then we're going to return JWT sign user info, and then we're going to pass in a secret for the token. I'm going to use an environment variable for that in the lambda function that we're going to use, that we're going to define later. Secret. And then we're going to set the expiration time. I'll just do 1 hour. This one, if you want, you can do something like my secret, but I don't like hard coding secret stuff. I'm just going to use the environment variable later on. Okay, so this is done. We're going to export this, and in the login file we are going to import that. And then in here we can just do auth generate token user info. Oh, we already have user info here. That means inside the auth we don't need to define this. That should do it. And now we're going to define a response body called user info, and then the token to be token, and then we're going to return a 200 response. And next we need to define the get user function, which is the same as the register one. So I'm just going to copy that over. Okay, so finally we're going to expose the login method. Alright, so that is done. And now let's go back to the index.js file. And lastly, we're going to handle the verify path. And same thing, we're gonna first extract the body, and then we're gonna use the verified service to verify the token and see if it expires or if it's valid. And now we're gonna go to the verified.js file to define this function. So it's gonna be a function verified request body, and if the request body doesn't have a user, or it doesn't have a username in the user, or it doesn't have a token, we're going to return a 401. So u2 we're going to say verified to be false, and then a message to be incorrect request body. And now let's handle the normal request. User, we're going to have that from the request body, and then token as well. And then we're going to see if it's verified. Verification. Alright, let's define this in the auth file as well. So go back to the auth and then define a function called verified token that takes in a username and the token, and then it will return jwt.verify token. And again, we're going to use the secret from the environment variable, and then the callback function is going to be like this. If error, we're going to return verified to be false, and then a message is going to say invalid token. But if it comes back but the username is not equal to the intended username, we're also gonna return verified to be false, and then the message is gonna say invalid user. And then finally, if everything is successful, it's gonna say verified true, and then message to be verified. And then we're going to export this. So in our verify file, we can just import that and use it as is. Auth verified token, username, and then token. So if it comes back and verified is true, or verified is not true rather, we're going to return a 401 with a verification response. But if it's verified successfully, we're going to return a 200 with the token. Verified is true, message, I just say, and then we're going to return back the user and the token as well. Module export. Okay, so everything is done. We have the index that calls all the login, register, and verify functions. Okay, so after I finished writing this, I found a few mistakes, so I'm going to go through and fix them one by one. So the first one is under auth. We changed the name of the parameter, but we didn't change it here. And then the second one is under register, that we have a misspelling in here. That should be camel case. And then on the bottom here, that is not correct. It should be like this. And then the next one is inside the login.js, where here it should be generate token, not get token. And then the last one was inside index.js. There's a typo here. Should be verified. Oh, there's one more, I think. Under verified. That should be not. And that should be everything. And now let's install the two modules and then upload the package to our Lambda function to test out things. So I'm gonna do terminal, new terminal, and then do npm install. Alright, so what it does is that it just installs whatever we specified under the dependency attributes and then save that in the node module folder. And if you don't have npm installed in your machine, you can just go to the web page and then follow the instruction to download that. And now I'm going to navigate to this working directory and then zip up everything and upload that to our Lambda function. So this is my directory. I'm going to select everything, compress. And now let's go back to the AWS console. Go to Lambda, upload from zip, and then navigate to the directory of the zip folder. It's in here. And then choose the zip file. That's our deployment package that has everything. Hit save. Okay. Alright, so the code is updated. And we need to do one more thing. Remember, in our code, inside auth, we said that we're going to set this as an environment variable. And now we're going to do that. So I'm going to copy this. Go to configuration. And the environment variables on the side here. Hit edit. Add. Let's just do Genmeister secret. Hit save. Alright, so it's done. And now let's go to Postman. Let's check the health first. Alright, successful. And now let's do register, which is a post method. And we have the API key. Let's go back to the dynamodb to make sure that we don't have anything here first. Let's do refresh. It's empty. So in the request body, I hit raw JSON. We're gonna have a name attribute. Let's just do Felix. And then email. test@email.com. And then username. Let's do Felix, lowercase, and then password ABC, and then hit send. Alright, so it's successful. And now let's go to our dynamodb and see our user object. Yep, so everything's successful. And the password is encrypted. And if I try to register this one more time with the same information, it's going to tell me that username already exists. So it's working as we expected. And now let's try to log in with the information. Just do login. And then we're going to give it a username and password. Hit send. It's successful, logged in. It sends back the user item and then the token with it as well. So if we do, let's say, the wrong password, it's going to tell us password is incorrect. If we do the wrong username, it's going to say user does not exist. Now it works again. And now let's try to verify our token. I believe it takes in a user item that has a username inside. And then token to be the token. Hit send. It's successful, it's verified. And then if we changed it a little bit, it's going to say it's invalid token. And if we do this, it's going to say invalid user. Alright, so it seems like it's working properly. One thing you can test out is inside the auth file. In here, you can change it to like 10 seconds and test out the token being expired after 10 seconds. But I'm not going to do it here. I'll just leave it for you to experiment. And that is it for part 1 of the tutorial. I hope you have learned something. And if you like this video, please give it a thumbs up, and I'll see you in part 2 of the tutorial.